Welcome everyone to day 2 of the Sahavas. We hope that all of you who participated in the japa today and the arti found these to be heart-opening experiences with our beloved Baba. As I said last night, this is the 71st anniversary of Baba's 1952 accident, and we're so happy that you could join us. I'm Pamela Butler-Stone, and it's been my great privilege to be president of the Heartland Center for the past 7 years. I want to give a shout out of appreciation to our tech team who really demonstrated grace under pressure yesterday when the internet went down completely at the Heartland Center and stayed down until maybe a half hour into the program. So the program was really being run entirely through hotspots. So that was a pretty amazing phenomenon. Just want to talk a little bit about what Baba said about Sahavas. He said that Sahavas is the give and take of love. And it's the keynote of any Sahavas program is a love exchange, giving and receiving of love. And I wanted to share a quote that reminds me of. I feel like it really conveys the essence of Sahavas, where Baba says, love is essentially self-communicative. Those who do not have it, catch it from those who have it. Those who get love from others cannot be its recipients without giving a response, which in itself is of the nature of love. True love is unconquerable and irresistible, and it goes on gathering power and spreading itself until eventually it transforms everyone whom it touches. So I want to just say a little bit about the Heartland Center for those who haven't been. And the Heartland Center was founded as a retreat center so that Baba lovers could come and visit the 2 sacred sites that are associated with Meher Baba's accident. One is the hospital, which adjoins the Heartland Center, and that's where Meher Baba and his 3 women Mandali, Mera, Meru, and Elizabeth Patterson, recuperated for 12 days following the accident. And just wanted to say this about the hospital, that the staff there at the hospital welcome us to come, and they seem to be very, very attuned to how special the room is. They call it the prayer room. In fact, they've labeled the key to that room, prayer room. And then, of course, the other site is the accident site where Meher Baba spilled his blood on American soil, just as he had predicted many years before. The Heartland Center has 2 houses. One is the Burleson House, which was the original house of Dr. Ed Burleson, who treated Baba. And the other is the Morrison House, which was owned by Speedy Morrison, the banker in Prague, who, as Julia Margaret mentioned last night, saved the hospital on several occasions from being closed down. Even though tonight and last night is a virtual Sahavas, the fact that it's being filmed from the Heartland Center right next to the hospital where Baba and his Mandali recuperated will hopefully bring some of the fragrance of that sacred place through our Zoom connection. This evening's panel with Philip Lutgendorf and Daniel Stone about Baba's sacred sites promises to be a rich and very meaningful discussion. And to set the tone for this evening, I want to share a personal story that happened probably 7 years ago, just after I became president of the Heartland Center. And I was speaking to a friend who was seriously considering the possibility of coming to live at the Heartland Center and be the caretaker. And she wanted to know about the Heartland Center. And so she asked me to just tell her what it was like. And so I immediately shared my experience of being in Baba's hospital room, saying that that hospital room has such a feeling of Baba's presence and what I experienced there most would be, I would say, is Baba's compassion, his great compassion that is so just profound and overflowing that I almost feel like it's more than my heart can hold. And then my friend said, well, tell me more. And immediately this image came to mind, and it's not my usual way of speaking, but it was almost as though it was emblazoned across my forehead in big letters saying, the Heartland Center is a portal to Baba's Samadhi. And so I finally said to her, I said, well, this is what's coming up. This is what it is. That's how it's being seen. And then she said, well, tell me what preg means. And I said, well, that's an interesting question. I thought, why is she asking that? But I said, well, let's look it up on the etymologic dictionary. And we did. And it means, it's from the Czech word praha, meaning threshold. And at that point, we both got chills, feeling like, whoa, Baba is really giving us a strong hint that this is exactly true, what this image that came up. Because obviously, when we're in India, we touch the threshold before entering, going through the door, the portal, into Baba's Samadhi. So anyway, now I'm going to turn the program over to Elisa Genovese, who will lead us through this evening. Thanks and welcome, Jai Baba.
Thank you, Pamela. That was very beautiful. Well, welcome back, everybody. For those of you who are new to joining us this evening, and welcome back to those who were on last night. If you are new to coming this evening and you did miss last night, there will be a recording of the whole event posted on our website, probably within a couple of days, so you can watch what you missed. And I'll just recap what you missed, so that way you'll know what to look for. We had an opening address by Pamela Butler-Stone about the Heartland Center, which she did kind of reiterate a bit tonight again. There was a short presentation by Lynn Berry about the foreshadowing of Baba's accident. We also showed a film montage of interviews from clips from the film entitled The Greatest of My Suffering, which had interviews with Dr. Burleson, the doctor who treated Baba, Meher, and Elizabeth in Prague immediately following the accident, as well as some clips of Philip Lutgendorf talking about his experience. We also had a featured speaker last night was Julia Margaret Burleson, who is the daughter of Dr. Burleson, and she shared with us, for the most part, she shared with us her experience of being captured, as she said, in the net, in Baba's net in 2002, after having gone through that experience as a young girl, and then just all those years later, really coming to Baba for her own. So that was quite beautiful, and if you could take a look at that, you would enjoy it. We'll have music from we had music from our wonderful guests from Nashville, Julie and Rusty Rust, which was just delightful to end out the evening. The sharing, though, of the major news that we had last night was about the hospital where Baba recuperated, which is now a pilgrimage site for Baba lovers who come from all over the world. And the hospital, as we have just been learning, may become available for acquisition within the next 5 years. And so this is a very exciting new development, and we're actively involved in discussions with the city of Prague to help ensure that we'll be able to purchase this hospital and memorialize it for posterity. So this is very, very exciting new development, as this site, along with the accident site itself, are among the most important sacred sites associated with Meher Baba's advent in the Western world. So we will be keeping you abreast of that. And if you could follow us on Facebook and Instagram and going to our website and sign up for the newsletter, there'll be lots of information coming in the coming year about this and ways that you can get involved. So that's the recap from last night. So hopefully you'll be able to tune into that. So let's turn now to this evening, present time. We'll be having another wonderful program this evening, and tonight we'll be sharing with you to dovetail on to what was shared about the Heartland Memorial Initiative last night. We're going to be sharing with you some of the preliminary plans that are in the works for drawings that will be information about, you know, what the possible memorialization would look like and ways that you can contribute to this effort going forward. The featured presentators tonight are a panel discussion of presenters that offer their experiences, well, entitled The Significance of Baba's Sacred Sites. So we have two panelists tonight, Daniel Stone and Philip Lutgendorf. And we did have a third who was supposed to join us, Susan McDonald, but due to a family emergency, she's unable to participate. So we'll have a slightly shorter panel this evening. But we will be having Daniel Stone, who will be sharing some information about what Baba himself has said about the significance of these sites, and review some of the major sites that have been memorialized already for posterity. And Philip will be focusing specifically on the site in Prague, where Baba had his accident in 1952. Philip was one of the very first to discover this site amongst the post-Mandali generation of Baba lovers and brought this to the attention of so many others. So he'll be sharing his experiences and thoughts about this site. And we will be, at the end of the panel, we'll be opening up to questions from the audience. If there's anybody who has any questions at any point during the panelists' talks, please just put your questions in the chat and we will do our best to get to them at the end of the presentation. And then we'll be closing out our Sahavas this evening with another round of wonderful songs from Julie and Rusty Rust from Nashville. Okay, so let us begin. The first presenter is Daniel Stone. Thank you, Daniel.
Jai Baba, everyone. Welcome back to the Sahavas. I'm really excited to be sharing with you and also sharing on this panel with Philip about the significance of sacred sites with Meher Baba. So I'm going to share a little bit with you about what I believe is actually meant by calling a site a sacred site for Baba, and then give some perspective about what Baba has said about his sacred sites, and also talk a little bit about a pattern that seems to be established with every avatar about how they go about establishing their own sacred sites. And then from there, we're going to do kind of a global tour of Baba's sacred sites around the world. But before I do any of that, I want to begin a little bit with my own experience here at the Heartland Center, which, as we know, is an important sacred site in the Western world. So I first came to the Heartland Center about 10 years ago. I was asked to come here to do some consulting work with the board of directors at that time about addressing some of their governance issues. And so up to that time, I had not paid much attention to the Heartland Center. I always thought, it's a nice historical site, but because I was kind of remote, it's a not easy place to get to. I wasn't particularly drawn to just traveling into Oklahoma. So it was never much of a priority of mine to come visit here. But when I showed up here to help out the board of directors, I thought I was really here to do a project for Baba. And of course I did do that project. But then I found out really that maybe Baba had a deeper purpose in my coming here. And that may sound familiar to many of you, to think you're doing one thing for Baba and then find out that Baba's real purpose is really something quite different. At any rate, one of the first things I did when I got here was one of the board members took me over to experience Baba's hospital room. And when I entered that room, where Baba had spent 12 days following the accident, I was just overwhelmed with the experience of Baba's love and presence in that room. And for the first time, I knew in my heart, this is not a historical site. Of course, it is a historical site in one sense, but truly speaking, it's a sacred site because it carries Baba's presence, and it's one that is unique in its quality and its importance. And as you probably know, Baba said that he would shed his blood on American soil. He also indicated that America would lead the world spiritually into the era that he called the new humanity. So it might be conjectured that this accident had something fundamental to do with preparing America for its role in the new age. So I want to share with you some images here to go with what I'm sharing. So we know that Baba's accident took place on May 24th on the side of Route 62 outside of Prague. And you can see that right here in the flowers that are in the bottom part of the picture frame. And then we also know that Meher Baba, and along with Meru, Elizabeth, and Mara, recuperated in the Burleson Clinic, which is a photograph here then of what it looked like back then and what it looks like today. So, of course, the meaning of this accident can be, we can conjecture about the meaning of this accident, but what's far less prone to conjecture and available for personal experience is the actual experience of being at these two sites associated with his accident. And as Pamela said, by the goodwill and graciousness of the hospital, every one of us is afforded the opportunity to step into and spend time in that room where the ancient one, Meher Baba, spent those 12 days apparently doing his intensive universal work. And those, again, who have had that experience have consistently spoken about their experience of his presence in that room, just as Pamela just did. But rather than tell you what I experienced there, I will leave it to each one of you to come and find it for yourself if you've not already done so. But this is what I want to suggest to you is the meaning of calling this a sacred site. It's not simply a historical site where we might imagine what happened there. It is the living experience of Baba's presence that actually makes it a sacred site. Now, in a talk that Philip Lutgendorf, our next panelist, recently gave on the occasion of the centenary of Baba's first coming to Mehrabad in 1923, he addressed the significance of the sacred sites of the Avatar. And in it, he said, for each Advent, there are places that became special to the God-man, where his presence and fragrance linger on, so that it seems to his lovers that these places actually share something of the beloved's divine nature. As a scholar of old Hindi literature, I've studied quite a bit of Vaishnava Bhakti poetry, and the sacred places associated with Krishna and Rama loom large in it. The Vaishnavas call them each a, quote, dham, which means abode or dwelling place, and believe that once the avatar has stayed there, the place becomes so permeated with his presence that it is actually an extension and embodiment of himself. And although the avatar has sometimes spent time in big cities, he seems, looking at history, to have mostly preferred places that were small, out of the way, and even desolate. Forests, jungles, deserts, rustic, and wild places. Now, as early as 1931, Baba spoke about his intention to create centers. He said to Meredith Starr, one of his very earliest Western disciples, Baba said, spiritual centers are to be opened, especially in America, Turkey, Russia, Persia, and England. And the Devonshire retreat, that's the retreat that Meredith Starr established in the western part of England, the Devonshire retreat will be such a center. Baba also said, whenever I visit a place and stay there, however short a time, its spiritual atmosphere becomes greatly elevated. Meher Baba, and these places where he was so intensively involved as he was at the time of his automobile accidents would seem to evoke that feeling especially strongly. So a number of these special sites at which he left the fragrance of his presence continue to be available for his lovers and will hopefully remain so for all time. Now, let's do a kind of a global trip to look at some of the major spiritual centers that have been established for Meher Baba. And there are a number in the United States, so let's start here. The one that is best known, of course, is the Meher Spiritual Center that Baba visited 3 times in 1952, 1956, and 1958. He said that of all the places he had laid his head, this is the place he loved the most. And he promised us that he would never leave. And today, people continue to come from all over the US and from all over the world, not just because it is a beautiful place with a mile-long ocean front, which of course it is all of that, but they come to experience the intimacy of love connection with Meher Baba. And they don't come just once, but they come over and over to re-emerge themselves into the beauty of this atmosphere and rekindle their love for Baba. When Elizabeth Patterson commented once about the uniqueness of the Meher Center, she acknowledged its physical beauty, but talked about it having a, quote, plus quality, which of course is the beloved's timeless presence so readily found there. Meher Mount is another sacred spot in the US visited by Meher Baba in 1956, where he brought his lovers for an afternoon spent there. And about Meher Mount, Baba said, "I love Meher Mount very, very much." Now, Baba also indicated, and we said this yesterday, that there would eventually be 5 centers associated with him in the United States. One would be by the ocean, which we would presume would be the Meher Center. One would be in the mountains. And we might note that Meher Mount is actually located at the summit of Sulphur Mountain, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. One of them would be in the very center of the US, and we might conjecture that that means it was the Heartland Center. Also, he said one would be in the desert and one would be in a large city. So with Baba's statement, one can imagine that all of these might, or some or all of these might be considered sacred sites. And of course, there are other sacred sites elsewhere in the Western world that I've not reviewed with you, such as Yukon Dunes, which has been acquired recently by Sufism Reoriented and is being used for their purposes. Now, going on around the world to Australia. In Australia, Baba established Avatar's abode as a place of world pilgrimage, and he sanctified this site in 1958. It was created by Francis Brabazon with assistance from Bill LePage and many others. And it too is a retreat center far from a large city and a place of great natural beauty. And again, interestingly, it is at the summit of Keels Mountain with views of the ocean that can be seen in the distance. But it is, and just like the Meher Center, it is a place where a deep sense of connection with Baba is found by his lovers. Going to Sydney. In Sydney, Francis Brabazon built Meher House. He actually chiseled it out of stone to build this house. And Baba stayed there during his stays in Australia in 1956 and 58. And it remains a special place of pilgrimage available for all those who love Baba. Going to Europe. Another very important sacred site, one of the most important in the Western world, can be found on Mount Subasio outside Assisi, where Baba had his disciples found a cave in which he was to meet with the spiritual hierarchy, and where Baba said that with the spiritual hierarchy, they planned out the next 2,000 years of human spiritual development. With a little effort and guidance, one can find this cave and again experience his presence there, which remains palpable even today, more than 90 years after that one eventful day. Now let's go to India. India is, of course, the place where Meher Baba spent most of his life. So there are countless sites there that exude his presence. And Baba encouraged his lovers to visit those places to be able to bask in the fragrance of his love and remembrance. Some of those in India that are viewed as most important are Sassoon Hospital, where Baba was born in 1894, and the room where he was delivered was in the old Sassoon Hospital, which was torn down in recent years. However, the Avatar Meher Baba Trust persuaded the hospital to dedicate a room in the new hospital to Baba's birth, and it's composed of materials from the room where Baba was originally born, and they call it the Meher Baba Room. Baba's home in Pune is where he lived as a child, along with living next door at Pumpkin House. Also, his house is where, after receiving his kiss from Babajan, Baba would bang his head against the floor, which you see here covered by plexiglass, to absorb the agony of what he experienced as he descended from the higher planes. Mandala is in Madhya Pradesh, near Jabalpur, and is one of the places that Baba visited during the Blue Bus tours. And Baba considered establishing his universal spiritual center there. In fact, he even considered moving all of Meherabad to Mandala at one point. He had a replica of his samadhi constructed there, which even has the crypt in it, and which one can still visit. The trust owns this property, and they're in the process now of preparing it as a pilgrimage site. Satara is another property the trust is now actively developing as a pilgrimage site, and it's adjacent to the site, to the place where Baba had his accident in 1956. And this is the accident where Baba was badly injured, and he suffered from those injuries for the remainder of his physical life. The Mananash cave in Hyderabad is where Meher Baba began his Mananash work as the concluding phase of the new life. He spent 2 weeks here before returning to Seclusion Hill in Meherzad to complete the phase of that work that he did in India. And by the way, Baba also indicated to Elizabeth that he was to complete the Mananash work on behalf of the West during his first 2 weeks in seclusion in Myrtle Beach in 1952. Meher Sthana is in the village of Mahua of Mahamirpur. In February 1954, for the very first time, sitting outside a hut that had been constructed for him, Baba declared his avatarhood for the first time publicly, having the lovers gathered there with him repeat, "Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai," long into the night. And in the morning he said, "Today is my birthday, and it is the first time I have called out my own victory cry." There's a beautiful center there just adjacent to Meher Sthana that's been created for those who make the pilgrimage to Meherada where they can stay. And Guru Prasad was the residence of the Maharani of Baroda, an ardent lover of Meher Baba, who made the entire palace available to Baba during the 1960s. And Baba would retreat there with his mandali for the hot Indian summers, where he also conducted numerous darshan programs, including the Great East-West Gathering of 1962. This building was demolished after Baba dropped his body, but there remains a memorial to Baba and his work at Guru Prasad, constructed from materials from the original building, and this is under the aegis of the Avatar Meher Baba Trust. Now we come to the two major places of pilgrimage to Meher Baba, Meherzad and Meher. Meherzad is where Meher Baba resided from 1944 until his physical death in 1969, along with many of his closest Mandali, especially Mehra. And this place is replete with Baba's presence and is where even to this day, as the Mandali put it, one can see and experience how God lived as man. And finally, the crown jewel of all pilgrimage sites, Mehrabad, which is situated on a plot of land vacated by the British and which Baba first visited almost exactly 100 years ago today in 1923. It was given to Baba by Adi K. Irani and Rustam Irani's father, Kaikushru, and it became the major site associated with Meher Baba's universal work and is where his physical remains rest in his tomb shrine known as his Samadhi. Baba said that every avatar, when they drop their bodies, retains a, quote, seat, which is the source of their continued power that is used to effect the results of his universal work. And this is a site of major world pilgrimage, which Baba said would become the greatest place of pilgrimage in the world. About Mehrabad and Meherzad, Baba said that these two sites exist independently of each other, yet they function jointly to create one image, the image of him. Now, these, of course, are not all the sites, and there will likely be more to come, but they show a breadth of the treasures that Baba has left for his lovers, for posterity, to help us come closer and closer to him. Now, I have heard some people wonder whether Baba actually wanted special efforts to be made to create and memorialize these kinds of places, since we can always find Baba wherever we are. But in fact, Baba himself emphasized the importance of these places in speaking to his Mandali, and this is included in the Avatar Meher Baba trust deed, which he approved as follows. It says, the trustees should afford facilities in the future to those who wish to study or want to know more about these respective places and desire to conduct research in connection with the various activities and aspects of my work done there. They should also provide facilities to those who visit these places to pay homage, and also at such places where you have memorials, statues, or symbols kept or preserved thereat or therein. Now, when we would be with Erich sometimes in Mandali Hall at Meherzad, Erich would sometimes talk to us about why is it that we should return again and again to these sacred places, such as the Samadhi? Isn't going there once just enough, given that one can find Baba anywhere? But Erich would say to us, it's like we're on the trail of our divine beloved. We're seeking him out. And as such, we're like bloodhounds seeking the scent of Baba. And so we come to these places to get the scent. And then we go back into the midst of our lives and try to follow that scent that we've been given. But over time, just like with any bloodhound, the scent gets fainter until eventually we may even lose the scent. At that time, we can go back to these places which are heavy with the fragrance of the beloved and pick up the scent again, which then helps us continue our pursuit. So while each of us is able to find Meher Baba in our own hearts, no matter where we are, we're all also blessed with the availability of these sacred sites that he has given to us as a means to return again and again to the freshness of his presence and to deepen our remembrance of the one, our divine beloved. Jai Baba.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That's very amazing to think about all of the different places everywhere that Baba went and the work that he did, the immensity of the sacredness that was, just given that Baba had traveled all over the world, there's probably many more such sacred sites, but it does inspire you to think about wanting to go on the trail with Baba. So that was really very interesting. Thank you, Daniel, for putting that all together for us. So next up, we have Philip Lutgendorf, who will be sharing about his experience coming upon the accident site in Prague. Philip.
Okay, I just unmuted myself. Is that working?
Yes.
Yes, and
Perfect.
you can
Thank
see
you.
me. Okay. Well, I want to thank the organizers of this Sahavas, Daniel and Pamela and Alicia and others that are involved for giving me this opportunity to talk with you and to reminisce. And I especially want to thank Julia Margaret Burleson for the marvelous and very moving reminiscences that she shared with us last night. And in case you missed them, do be sure to watch the video of that, because they were very special moments. I also wish she were still here. I was hoping to talk to her tonight. I wanted to ask her secret for the 30-minute response time that she has with prayers to Meher Baba. If you didn't hear her last night, you'll find out what that means when you watch the video. Like Daniel, I prepared a little PowerPoint. Mine is not nearly as ambitious as his, but just to prevent you from having to look at me for the whole time. So let me start sharing screen here and make sure that this is working correctly. Now, no, we don't want that. We want to swap
Yes,
display.
good.
Good.
It's good.
Is it, you don't
Yes.
see my text that I'm using for myself?
No.
Okay, great, thank you. You just see Bob up basically, yeah? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
So when I first came to recognize Meher Baba as the avatar, God in human form, I felt an intense longing to see him and to be in his physical presence. When that proved impossible, and by the way, Julia Margaret may have given some people the impression yesterday that I had met Baba. I think what she meant was that when I first met her, I had been with Meher Baba for a long time, but she made it sound like I had been with Baba many times, which alas, was not the case. I never physically met him, though I heard of him in 1967. But anyway, when meeting him proved impossible, I felt that the next best thing was to meet and be with people who had been with him. And along with this, to be in places where he had spent time and had done some of his work. Raised in a nominally Christian but fairly agnostic family, I had never consciously made a pilgrimage in my life. But I now felt strongly attracted to the activity of pilgrimage to places in the world that had been sanctified by the God-man's physical presence as Meher Baba. My first opportunity to do this came in March 1968, when I traveled by bus to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and spent a week at the center. For me, as for so many other young people at that time, it was a transformative experience that both put me in contact with extraordinary people who had been with Meher Baba, Kitty Davey, Elizabeth Patterson, Jane Haynes, Lynn and Phyllis Ott, and others. Incidentally, Rick Chapman would also happen to be visiting when I was there, and he had just recently come back from his own meeting with Meher Baba in India and was very charged, and that was a wonderful thing as well. But it also allowed me to savor the atmosphere of a beautiful and peaceful place where special buildings and sites preserved the memory of Baba's 3 visits. I left the center with my heart overflowing. It was also around this time that I read about Meher Baba's injury in an automobile accident in 1952, resulting in the shedding of his blood on American soil. This made a powerful impression on me and awakened the desire in me to make a pilgrimage to the site of this act of grace and suffering. 2 years later, I was able to do so when I made a road trip from Chicago to the Southwest over spring break from college with 2 fellow students who were also Baba followers, Dot Cooper, who was at that time Dot Pierpont, and Chris Hudson. The trip included skiing and hiking in Colorado and New Mexico, and a plan, somewhat vague, to visit Prague, Oklahoma. We did not know the Americanized pronunciation of the town at that point, and we referred to it as Prague. Prague, Oklahoma, of which we had read in biographies of Meher Baba en route back to Chicago. There was, of course, no GPS or internet or Google Maps in those days, but we located Prague, and I'll call it Prague from now on. We located Prague in a road atlas and charted out a route there, hoping to get there on the morning of the day that we had to go back to Chicago. We were delayed, though, in leaving New Mexico by a heavy spring snowstorm, and we ended up driving through the night on a 2-lane highway across the Texas Panhandle. The drive seemed endless, and we had only a vague idea of where we were going and no idea of what would happen when we got there. The only name we knew in Prague was Burleson, but we didn't know whether the doctor was still active or even around. We especially wanted to visit the actual site of the accident 18 years before, but we knew only that it was roughly 7 miles outside the town. As the night wore on, we began to feel discouraged and even hopeless. 3 college kids in a VW Beetle trying to keep awake and stay warm. The car's heater didn't work, and it was a very cold night. Sometime around midnight, I noticed a blurry light in the sky ahead of us. Actually, at first I thought that it was a smear on the windshield catching light from some other source, but there were no cars on the road but us and no light to reflect. Finally, I pointed it out to Dot, who was driving, and she pulled over to the side of the road. We got out, and then we gasped, because it was a beautiful and unmistakable comet, tail upward and head pointing toward where our road was leading. It was, as the saying goes, a sign unto us. And we felt energized to continue our pilgrimage from that point on. The comet, about which we could find no information at the time, but which, thanks to Wikipedia, I have recently learned was indeed real, and named Comet Bennett, was considered one of the 2 great comets of the 1970s, according to the Wikipedia site. This was the first of a series of heart-touching serendipitous events that morning, beginning with a casual but portentous conversation with an extremely friendly waitress in a cafe in Prague, in which we stopped for a quick breakfast around 7 a.m. A woman who said she wished she could, quote, someday visit the places where Jesus walked, and who cheerfully directed us to Dr. Burleson's clinic, which was just down the street. Walking into what looked to be the older wing of the small hospital, we were politely greeted by a middle-aged nurse. We learned later that her name was Charlene Kemery. She told us that Dr. Burleson was in and directed us to his nearby office. As we were getting ready to go there, I asked her whether the building we had come into had been there in 1952, She thought about this for a moment and then said, yes, it had. And then one of us, I think it was Chris, asked, were you here then? Again, her answer was yes. Then we asked, do you remember Meher Baba? Perhaps our pronunciation of his name was unexpected because she asked us to repeat it. But then she beamed and said, oh, of course, I was his nurse. She added that she had also taken care of Mehera and Meru and Mrs. Patterson while they were all in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks, and then had ridden in the ambulance van with them back to Myrtle Beach, which meant, of course, to us that she had spent a lot of time in beloved Baba's presence and with his close ones. We asked if we could talk to her again after we met with Dr. Burleson, and again she said, of course. Dr. Burleson was dignified and solemn, but friendly. Seeing 3 wild-eyed college kids pop in out of the blue, obviously not from Prague, where he had delivered nearly everybody in town and knew just about everyone, he correctly divined why we had come. You want to hear about Meher Baba, he said. Later, I learned that he had been receiving Mani's family letters for years, and so he likely knew about growing interest in Baba among young people in the United States, and may have anticipated being contacted sooner or later. When we arrived, he was about to set out on his rounds, daily rounds around the hospital, but he still took time to sit with us, saying quietly, oh yes, I remember Baba. He recalled the chaos of that morning in May 18 years before, when 4 badly injured people were brought in by ambulance. He spoke of the mud, blood, and broken glass that had to be cleaned out of the patient's wounds, of his concern that Mehera, who had, as he said, the worst skull fracture he had ever seen, would not survive, and of Baba's own evident wish, conveyed by smiles and gestures despite his own injuries, that she be treated first. He also told us about his growing admiration during the days that followed for the fine people, as he put it, in Baba's party. I have given more details of Dr. Burleson's reminiscences according to my own recollection in an account I wrote for the Awakener magazine shortly after the visit. And if you're interested, that is now available online. It's called A Visit to Prague, Oklahoma. Once we had visited the hospital, where the rooms that had been occupied by Baba and Mehera had other patients and equipment in them at the time of our visit, so that we only had a peek into them. And once we had met Dr. Burleson, our other priority was to try to find the site of the accident. But we felt a bit awkward about this pilgrimage goal, thinking it might seem weird or overtly religious or even spooky or occult to local people in what we assumed to be a mainstream Middle American Christian community. We had mentioned it hesitantly to Dr. Burleson, but he merely said that he didn't know exactly where it happened because he hadn't ridden out in the ambulance, but his nurse had, and she would know where it was. So when we left his office, we reconnected with this very friendly woman, and after chatting with her about her recollections of the party's hospitalization and recovery, we again spoke cautiously about wanting to go to the site where the accident actually occurred. To our surprise, Ms. Kemery immediately said, oh, of course, you must go there. And then she added quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself, the ground is still so red up there. Incidentally, blood was a recurring theme in Dr. Burleson's reminiscences as well as the nurses. And I just want to add to what Daniel said earlier about the accident site. Those of you that attended the virtual Sahavas last year may remember Shelley Marich's excerpts that I forget who read them, but Shelley allowed them to be read, from the book that she's writing about Dr. Goher. And there were excerpts from Dr. Goher's diary in which it was revealed that Baba had profusely vomited blood that he had swallowed in the hospital room. So the hospital room was, I mean, to the extent that the walls and ceiling of the hospital room had to be cleaned of his blood. So there was a great deal of blood shed at the hospital as well as at the site of the accident. Goher had completely, freaked out when this happened. She thought Baba was dying, and Dr. Burleson had to calm her down and reassure her that such regurgitation was natural in people who had swallowed a lot of blood following facial injuries. Anyway, that's just an aside. The nurse then gave us driving directions while we took notes on a piece of paper. But even while she was talking, she seemed to realize that we might have trouble recognizing certain landmarks and finding the place. And she said something to the effect of, "Oh, I'd go with you, but I can't get away. I'm on duty now," which again touched us very much, though we replied that we were sure her directions would be enough. But they weren't, as it turned out. And as we neared the 7-mile point of distance from Prague on the VW's odometer, we stopped at 2 white farmhouses that seemed to match the nurse's description, only to find them occupied by families who had moved in recently and knew nothing about a road accident in 1952. Then we saw a 3rd house further ahead and pulled up in front of it. But by now we were wondering if maybe we had taken a wrong turn somewhere. Even as I opened the car door to get out and inquire, another car pulled up behind us, and to our complete surprise and amazement, out jumped the nurse saying, "This is it." We said, "But you're supposed to be on duty." And then she explained very hastily that she had forgotten about the other 2 houses and said, "I just had to make sure you found it." Again, we were so touched that she would do this, that she understood how much seeing and being at this place meant to us. She walked with us up onto the front porch of the house and made sure that we were introduced to the family that lived there. And that we would be able to talk further with them. And again, more details of those conversations are given in my Awakener article, to which I would refer you. She then hurried back to her car and immediately returned to her work at the hospital in Prague. One of the characteristics of sacred sites of pilgrimage, in my understanding, and this kind of follows from what Daniel said earlier, is that they are places in the mundane world where Maya can become just a little bit transparent for those who seek God, truth, or what Baba has called eternal significance, allowing a glimpse of deeper reality to come through the dense fog of illusion that our limited egos normally generate. For me, the glimpsing of a deeper reality on that long ago journey to Prague began with the sighting of the comet that guided us by night, continued through the heartwarming conversations we had with people in town, and especially with Dr. Burleson and the nurse, and culminated in the bright spring sunshine on that hilltop with the angel-like intervention of Nurse Charlene Kemery, who just had to make sure that we reached the goal of our pilgrimage. I'd like to end this talk with a tribute to the other person who was terribly injured in the accident and treated by Dr. Burleson in Prague, Baba's driver, Elizabeth Chapin Patterson. If I recall correctly, Baba once said something to the effect that my work in the West will be done by women. And Elizabeth was surely one of the pillars of that work. She had surrendered to him with her involuntary exclamation, "It's you," on her first meeting with him in Harmon on Hudson, recognizing him as her beloved Lord. Incidentally, that phrase from Elizabeth's diary is now the title of a beautiful book about Baba's visits there, written by Dot Cooper, in whose car we went to Prague. And throughout the grueling hardships of the blue bus tours, when this former New York City society woman accompanied and usually drove Baba and his women Mandali on the rough roads of India, often setting out at 3 or 4 a.m., and Elizabeth was famously not a morning person. After only a few hours of sleep, without bedding, on the floor or table of a dusty PWD inspection bungalow, she was known for her extraordinary equanimity and her inevitable response to Baba's every wish. "Yes, Baba dear." On that morning outside Prague, driving at Baba's urging at high speed, Elizabeth sustained the kind of internal injuries that were regularly fatal to motorists in collisions in that era before seatbelts or airbags. Crushed by the car's steering wheel, her lungs pierced by spear-like pieces of her broken ribs. She bled internally and could barely breathe. The pain, both in the immediate aftermath of the crash and in the days and weeks that followed, must have been awful. After her return to Myrtle Beach, where she was a prominent citizen, Elizabeth came to know of the disparaging comments of people who questioned how she could still follow an alleged spiritual master who would allow such a tragedy to befall himself and his close ones. The common complaint of "Why would God let this happen?" that is often made by those who say they have abandoned faith in a benevolent Almighty. Yet Elizabeth seems never to have wavered in her faith and surrender, and in her conviction that this accident was a necessary part of Meher Baba's work, in which it was actually her privilege to share. When I visited the center again after going to Prague, I was privileged to have a long conversation with Elizabeth at Dilruba, the home that she shared with Kitty Davy. She was happy to hear about our pilgrimage, and at the end of the conversation, she went into her room and got out and showed me a small treasure that I had read about and was eager to see. You will probably guess what it was. At that time, it was still among her personal belongings and not yet in a display case in Baba's house. But I'm struck by the fact that, as Elizabeth told me, it was only long after the accident, I think more than a decade, that she had unpacked an old trunk of belongings that had been in storage during her years with Baba in India, and came across the little New Testament with a cover made of cedar of Lebanon wood that she had bought on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land sometime before she met Baba. She had in fact forgotten all about it and about the little addition she had made to it, that it was the safe place in which she had pasted and dated the small wildflower that Baba had given her one afternoon in Harmon on Hudson when she chose to stay by his side while others in the party wandered off. But decades later, casually opening the little book's cover and noticing the faded flower and her penciled note, Baba, May 24th, 1932, Elizabeth received, in Baba's inimitable way and time, a gentle but profound affirmation of the eternal significance of the events in Oklahoma in which she had taken part. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Thank you so much, Philip. That was really, really beautiful. And just, one question just quickly is which which issue of The Awakener is your article in?
I'm afraid I don't know, but there is Google to the rescue. I found it the other day when I wanted to look something up myself. I think if you just enter a visit to Prague, Oklahoma, and my name, I think you'll find it.
Okay, thank you.
Daniel actually made me aware that it's online. I didn't know that.
Okay, so we just have a few questions. One to Daniel. You mentioned Baba saying Devonshire as a retreat center. Is there a center there now? And are there other centers for Baba in Europe?
So as far as I know, there's no center today in Devonshire. I actually went to Devonshire once and walked by the farmhouse where Meredith Starr had established the retreat center, that many of his lovers were there with him for the first time, or almost the first time, including Margaret Crass, Kitty and Herbert Davy, and Delia de Lyon and others. But so it doesn't seem like that retreat center has happened to date. And I'm sure there are other places that could be memorialized if they were acquired. But as of now, I don't know of any other sites in England that really are established as sacred sites for Baba. There are sites for Baba, like in Hammersmith in London. There's Don Stevens' former apartment that is the home of the Meher Baba Association there. But again, I'm not sure that any of the Baba never visited that, so it doesn't really come under that definition. Also, I would say there are other sites in America that could eventually become sites. 88 Grove Street in New York is where Baba spent some time in New York City. Harmon on Hudson, Baba spent a lot of time there. That was where he first met Elizabeth Patterson, Narita Machiavelli, and many others. But those are, right now, they're all privately owned. But who knows? One day they may in fact be acquired.
So this is why it's good to know about all of these sites,
Yeah.
because we have to keep our radar. You know, seems like in this generation, we do have a responsibility as early followers of Meher Baba to be aware of these sites.
Absolutely.
And to, you know, to keep our focus on them. So we have one for Philip. You are a Hindu scholar. Are there sacred sites associated with Ram and Krishna that Baba visited and paid special attention to?
I don't know about special attention, but Baba certainly was in some of the places that are pilgrimage places. Nasik, Baba spent a good deal of time in Nasik, and Nasik is a very important site in the Ramayana story. It's actually supposed to be the place from which Sita was kidnapped by the demonic king Ravana and carried off. And so it's sacred to Hindu pilgrims, and there's, you know, large gatherings there periodically. And of course, Baba was in Vrindavan in northern India, which is supposed to be where Krishna spent his childhood and played with the gopis and tended cows, and that's a very beautiful sacred place as well. And there's wonderful stories about Baba being recognized by a must there who was named Krishna because he went around repeating Krishna's name and searching for Krishna, and finally found him in the form of Baba one morning. So there are stories like that. Other than that, I don't know of any particular connection. You know, Baba traveled so widely in India that I would expect he was in, you know, many, many places that are also sacred to various events in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. But I don't know of particular connections like that.
Actually, Chris Barker just said, and Happy Valley.
Oh, of course, Benares, yes.
No, Happy
Right.
Valley.
And Happy Valley, yes, which is also connected. Actually, you know, in Maharashtra, I often talk about this when I lecture on the Ramayana. You know, in their wanderings in exile, Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana were supposed to have sort of crisscrossed the Deccan Plateau. And in Maharashtra, there are many places where villagers believe that they stayed, and where people will tell you this was Sita's kitchen, you know, this is where she she had her hearth, or springs of water, which is what you have at Happy Valley, you know, in that very arid Deccan landscape, a spring of water about which it is said that Sita was thirsty and Ram shot an arrow into the ground and this spring gushed forth. And you know, now this is where we get our water from, you know, in our village. There are many places like that. Thanks. And of course, Todd Nakowitz from New Zealand reminds us that Baba spent a lot of time in Benares during the New Life. Yeah.
Thank you, Philip. It just occurs to me that in truth, everywhere Baba stepped is sacred ground. So, you know, it's pretty much all over the world at this point. Okay, Samuel, we have a question for you. Guru Prasad was so important to Baba. Why was this site not acquired by the trust? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I do. So the Maharani of Baroda actually offered it to the trust after Baba dropped the body. And it was a palace, and it was really quite immense. And so, and at the time that Baba dropped the body, the trust had no money. And so they weren't even sure they were going to have money for food, you know, much less to acquire a large, complicated site that was going to require a great deal of maintenance. It was simply out of the question. And I think there was a sense of, especially at that time, like, why do we really need to acquire and memorialize every site that Baba went to? Because he went to, as Philip said, he went to so many sites. But I will say later on, I think that there was a shift in viewpoint about that amongst the Mandali. It appeared to me that when they established the focus on archives and the archive committee, Meheru actually made a number of very strong statements about how essential it is to acquire and memorialize and make these sites available for posterity. And so there really was a shift in emphasis. But again, that was at a very different time after Guru Prasad. So I think that, I don't think Guru Prasad can be taken as an example of really what Baba always intended about whether memorials should be established. Philip, I don't know if you have a thought about that also.
Yeah, no, I'd like to add to that, Daniel. What I concur with what you said. I was there in my first pilgrimage to India was in October, November of 1971. And while I was in Ahmednagar, we learned that Guru Prasad was going to be demolished. And I specifically asked Mani, you know, how can you allow this? And I hadn't visited it yet. I visited it on my way out of India. And I said, how can you allow this? And she was quite frank and said, you know, our first responsibility is to preserve Meherabad and the Samadhi, and we're just overwhelmed. You know, she had just taken over the trust at that point, and they really didn't know how things were going to fall out and how they were going to pay taxes. And, you know, I mean, just lots of pragmatic considerations. And as you say, Guru Prasad was an immense property and would have required a lot of upkeep. One little thing, though, for me, I mean, it meant a lot to me because of the events that had happened there. And I was unable to attend the Great Darshan in '69 because of illness. And some of my friends had gone and had brought back, you know, stories about being in Guru Prasad and how moving it was. And so I was very keen to see it. So on my way out of India, this was at the very beginning of December '71, I went to Pune and I went to Guru Prasad, and it just so happened, my good fortune, I walked into Guru Prasad and there were Mehera and Mani.
Wow.
And
Wow.
they had come to get some of Baba's personal belongings out of the building before it was taken down. And so I had a personal guided tour from these two women Mandali. And I have somewhere, I wish I could show you, but I don't have it available right now. I have a beautiful photograph of Mehera standing in the rear French doors and gesturing and saying, "This is where the East-West gathering was held," pointing out to the field behind. So that was my little Guru Prasad moment. But the memorial is lovely that they've made. In case anyone hasn't visited it, it's very much worth visiting, and it is made with materials from Baba's bedroom. Yeah.
That's so sweet, Philip. That just sounds like you had that longing in your heart, and Baba gave you that gift. That's a beautiful story. That's very sweet.
So let me just say, somebody put in the chat, mentioned Panchgani and the tiger in the cage in the Tiger Valley. And I just want to acknowledge there are a lot of sites in India that I wasn't able to cover and didn't cover here. And really, it was only because of time, I didn't kind of go into everything that's there. There's another site in Hammer called Ichwara. There's, and many other sites that Baba went to. So what you got here was just a smattering of some of the major sites. So.
Could I just throw in one more thing here?
Please.
By the way, somebody said in the chat that they had heard the government had taken over Guru Prasad. That's not so. It was sold to a cooperative housing, development, which is what occupies most of it, the site now. But I wanted to mention, one other place for those when you go to Pune, actually two places. Deccan College is well worth a visit. Partly because it's mostly not a functioning college at this point, but the land has been preserved for various reasons. And so it's kind of like a time capsule. You go there and you walk around and you are seeing and being in the buildings that Mirwan must have studied in during his time as a college student there. And there are huge old trees, and it's a glimpse of Pune, which has largely disappeared, under Bombay-like urban sprawl. So I highly recommend that. The other place is the Pataleshwar cave, which is a cave temple where Baba spent a good deal of time after being kissed by Babajan, and it's a 7th or 8th century Shiva temple carved into the rock, sort of a la Ellora, but on a very small scale. And that's also a very beautiful place in a park in Pune.
Thank you. And Richard Griffin also put Biramangala into the chat. Again, I'm sure I missed many important spots. Biramangala, of course, is where Baba went on the Blue Bus tours when he was in search of his Universal Spiritual Center. And that was where he thought he would establish it. And he actually put a spike in the ground to establish the center there. And there was property acquired, but Baba later had that property sold. It has since been reacquired by Baba lovers. There's a trust now that governs it. And I know Sufism Reoriented has been involved with that trust in helping to kind of establish that as a memorial and sacred site associated with Baba.
Okay, so this is a question that came up in the chat that I'll say out, but I'm not 100% sure what the reference is. What is the reference for the list of countries in which sacred sites will be established eventually?
I have it, and I don't have it written down here, but you're welcome to contact me, and I'll send it to you. I found it off of a website. Frankly, I was very surprised by it to see that there was one in Turkey and one in Russia. Even, I mean, it was really interesting to read that list. And as far as I know, there is nothing in Turkey at this point. I don't know, did Baba even go to Turkey? I'm not even sure about that. And I don't know, I think Baba may have gone to Russia. I'm not sure. Anyway, but I don't, but again, if you contact me, if you don't know how to do that, good luck.
We can drop your email in the chat.
Yeah, I'll put my email here.
And then somebody asked, I wonder which side of the car Meher was sitting on. I believe it was the left side. But She was behind Baba, I think.
That would be the right side, I
Yeah,
think.
I mean, I meant, yeah, she was behind Baba. She
Yeah.
was on the right side of the car. I'm sorry.
But
Elizabeth was on the front left as the driver of an
driving.
American vehicle. Barbara was right next to her. And I guess the three women were in the back.
just to say, and again, this isn't exactly what the question asked, but for those, just as awareness, that it was women who were with Baba in the car in the 1952 accident in America, and it was men in the car who were in the accident with Baba at Satara in 1956. And some people do attribute significance to that difference as well, just to say.
Yeah.
As well as opposite sides of Baba's body that sustained
Yes.
the major injuries.
Yes. I think Baba did say something about that. I mean, I said something around about that. Okay, and then there's just a question we have from here. Is there any insights into how the townspeople of Prague feel about the AMB Heartland Center in general and about the possibility of acquiring the hospital? Period. I mean, we just had that experience with the tea yesterday.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I could say something about that because we, as I mentioned yesterday, we were fortunate enough to have Julia Margaret come on Monday, Sunday evening, and she was here on Monday, and we had a tea with the townspeople here at the open house for both the Burleson and the Morrison house, and many from the hospital staff came, including the city manager came as well. And we had about 20 people here, and Julia Margaret gave a talk, which was also videotaped, and perhaps we can make that available. But it was just such a lovely feeling for me to meet some of the hospital staff, because I had never met them before, and just how appreciative and receptive they were to be able to see the houses and come in and be welcomed. And they were Julia Margaret was connecting with people that she had known or had known her family. And it was just a very warm and open feeling. And at first it was just about, Julia Margaret talked about her family and what the Burleson family contributed to the town of Prague in general. And then little by little, it sort of went to Baba. And there was some very, she shared about her experiences with Baba, and people asked really interesting and informative questions. And the feeling in general when everybody left was very positive. Yeah.
I want to add a little bit to that. And I want to give a shout out to a number of people here, including Jane Montgomery, who's here as the caretaker. But even going, and Pamela Butler Stone, who as president, and the whole board of directors here, who've really done a great effort to establish a very friendly, neighborly relationship with this town. And with the hospital specifically, with the city manager the city owns the hospital site, and we have a very warm, easy friendship with those folks and in general. And this afternoon, Elisa and I went over to what's called the Prague Museum. And if you're ever in Prague, it's really worth a visit. It's quite a step back in time, is all I can say. And you see interesting hats and toys and musical instruments that go way back in the history of Prague as a town. But they actually have a section of the museum is dedicated to the accident. It's dedicated to Baba. And it has his photograph in there. It has a book with all the articles, including Philip's articles, is in there, some of Baba's books, and then a statement about Baba and who he is and the accident itself. So it's very interesting, because I would suspect that this is a pretty conservative town and in a pretty conservative area, very Christian-oriented era. And I think initially, when the Heartland Center was established, there was a lot of fear about this place. In fact, we were told that in the townspeople, when the Heartland Center was first established, some people were saying to one another, be careful not to eat their cookies, because there might be something in them. So there was, real caution about this. And again, I want to make sure my shout out goes all the way back to Carolyn Ball and all of, because, who was really very, very pivotal. And again, the many, many people, John Pogue and Debbie Nordine, and I don't want to name them all because I'll leave too many people out, but many people have really been part of trying to build a sense of comfort and respect for the Heartland Center, just as we have tried to be respectful and good neighbors with this town. So.
Right, okay. I'm sorry, just a couple of other questions came in. Okay, here's another question. I don't know how much more time we have, but this one just came in. Is there any way to know how much Baba's following has increased worldwide as well as here in the West? Are you seeing groundswells in recent years? I don't know.
Philip, you want to take a crack at that?
I'm sorry, I'm a very bad multitasker, and I was reading another comment in the chat, and I missed the question. Unlike the youth of today who can do all these things simultaneously, would you please repeat that, Alicia?
The question, it was, is there any way to know how much Baba's following has increased worldwide as well as here in the West? Are you seeing groundswells in recent years?
Yeah, I have no idea. Up until the time of the pandemic, because of my professional work, I was fortunate to be able to go to India twice a year. And I always made a pilgrimage to Meher when I was there.